Okay, I think we're ready. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm Melanie Redman. I lead Away Home Canada. We focus on youth homelessness prevention. And so I'm very excited for this session to learn about innovations in building and sustaining supportive housing and housing in general, because these are things that are issues of our time. So welcome. I am from Ontario, and so I'd like to acknowledge the land that we're here on today, the traditional unceded territory of the Ga-Nyan-Gahaga people. And I've been really fortunate over the years because I have a brother-in-law who is, he's been a lawyer for many, many years with the Mohawk Nation, and has really worked alongside them to uphold their rights and to fight for additional rights. So I'm proud to be here. So thank you for having me on this territory. We are welcoming some fantastic folks from close and afar. We have Natalia Martinez, Adrian Dingle, and Sheldon Pollitt. And we're talking about the successes and innovations in two different jurisdictions, Canada and Spain. And I know from my work over the years, visiting other jurisdictions and learning how they're doing things, and bringing some of that back to Canada and seeing how we can adapt that for the Canadian context has been really important and in many ways transformative. And so I'm very excited to hear from our guest and see how Sheldon and Adrian and team have learned from some of those lessons and what we can share with you here today. So they're going to give their presentations, then you can ask a few questions, just any clarifying things, anything you're just dying to get out. Then we'll move on to the other presentation, and then we will ask, we'll leave time at the end for questions. This goes right up to 5:15, and then after that, I think, is the reception. So give us your attention, and then it will be social time. So thank you, and without further ado, let's welcome Natalia. Natalia, please say more about yourself and your work.
Okay, thank you, Melanie, and thank you all for choosing this session. Un grand merci à tous. I'm really thankful to the conference and to Raising the Roof for the opportunity to share some learnings and also learning from you. I work at Hàbitat3, which is, we'll talk a little bit more about of who we are, a social housing non-profit provider. As I am the Director of Alliances and Communication, and I used to be Head of Acquisitions, and my background is in real estate, and for the last 10 years I've been somewhat working in housing from a non-profit perspective. So I'm just going to tell you a few things about who we are and how we do things, and hopefully at the end we can share a little bit what policies have enabled us to do what we do. This is where we are. We are in Barcelona, Catalonia, which is in the northeastern tip of Spain, and it's the at the southwest of Europe. Why we were born, I'm just sharing with you a few deficits that we have in the housing area landscape that gave us a reason to start doing what we do. You can see here how housing is the largest expense borne by the Spanish families, and not because housing is much more expensive. It is expensive, but it's not necessarily much more expensive than health and education. But health and education are covered mostly by the state. It's part of the welfare state, but housing is not. And this percentage, which is almost 32%, skyrockets to almost 50% when we talk about households earning less than 500 euros per month. This is it's a nice representation. This is like two ways of saying the same thing. One is the amount of social housing we have compared to other countries in Europe, and the other one is the overburden tax, which is considered when you pay more than 30% of your income in housing. So you basically see the correlation with having very little housing, social housing, and having a very high tax of overburden. And this is another indicator, and I'm not going to bother you with many more, but this is the emancipation rate. We have one of the highest average ages at which young people leave their parents' home, and also we have one of the also largest proportion of people that stay with their parents when they're 18 to 34. And again, you see the correlation with the indicators we have seen before. And this is a little bit about homelessness. There's about 28,000, a little bit more, according to the National Institute of Statistics, homeless people in Spain. Although Hogarsi, which is a leading organization in the battle against homelessness, estimates that the current figure is more around 37,000. So this is to provide a little context. And in this context, we were born 10 years ago on the aftermath of the mortgage crisis, when eviction rates were really, really high. And the promoter of our organization, which is a private organization, it's a foundation, was the board of what we call the third sector, the non-profit sector in Catalonia, because they realized that across the entirety of the non-profit sector in Catalonia, housing was a problem. So they identified a need for an organization that would provide and manage housing for other social organizations. And interestingly enough, also to provide an answer from the non-profit sector to help cover, the lack of social housing in the municipalities. So it was both an inside need of the non-profit sector and also a will of the non-profit sector to collaborate with the public administrations, particularly the local administrations. And this is how we were born. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay, so who do we cater for? Who are our tenants? Basically, people that have lost their homes and they are part of emergency programs or social service referrals. And we rent to them within a framework of an agreement with the city council. So that's one big chunk of the people that live in our homes. Then other group of people are those that are supported by social organizations. Mostly we rent the apartments to social organizations, and then the organizations decide the type of project, whether it is going to be a long-term dwelling or a short-term dwelling, whether it's going to be a shared space or not. And we do the provision of housing, and the social organizations do the support to the people. And the other group of people that we cater for, and this is a smaller program because it's a program that we are running on our own, and that's that we purchase homes with people living there, that they mostly were former owners that lost the apartment on a foreclosure, and then when the crisis came, the financial organizations had to do some social rental agreements with them, but that was not necessarily going to be keeping in the long run. So to avoid the risk of those insecure tenancies, we've been purchasing some homes and then doing a rental contract. And as far as a little screenshot of some data. Well, this one is the evolution of the amount of people that we have been housing, and then 66% are women, 26% are minors, and an interesting figure is that 37% of the households are single mother household. Not necessarily single mother on origin, but definitely single mothers right now. And how do we manage this? Basically, we collaborate with local administrations and with the Catalan government. We acquire homes through purchase or leases, long-term leases, or by developing new buildings, which is something that we have started most recently in the renovation of existing buildings. We work whenever we can. When we have to do a renovation, we do it with social enterprises that do trade training. So that provides job opportunities and training for people that also are in risk of being excluded from the labor market. So the homes have a double impact, not just for the people living in them, but also for the people that have contributed to the renovation. And then we manage the housing stock. We are actually the landlords. That gives us, as you might have already seen, according to the partners we have programs with public administrations. We provide and manage housing for public administrations. We have the programs with social organizations. This is a program that won the World Habitat Award in 2019. And then we have these, what we call independent programs, or programs that are run by Habitat3. And then we have another program which is not too large, but is very interesting because it goes even further on the prevention side, which is mediation and support services run together with some city councils to prevent people from actually losing their homes, negotiating with landlords and trying to find, whenever eviction is preventable, then trying to find solutions to avoid people actually becoming homeless. So this is a little bit in the homeless prevention. We could look at what we do from a homeless prevention point of view. You see that some programs tackle homelessness itself, like this program we run with Barcelona City Council. Some of the apartments, 350, are for the emergency program, and then 75 housing units are devoted to a Housing First program. Then we go to emergency housing, which prevents people from actually becoming homeless, or inclusive housing with social organizations, that people that find it more difficult to access housing and it's easier for them to lose their homes. And then the buying for people not to lose their home, and also so people actually can stay in their own apartment, not just not to go to become homeless, but to keep their own home, which is, at some point, we bought an apartment and we agreed with the city council south of Barcelona to bring it to their emergency program, and they referred us a family. I shiver when I tell this story, because by the time we went there and signed the contract with the people and they went into the apartment, it was their own apartment that they had lost, and then that we were able to purchase. If you can imagine, just in terms of economy, how much would have been saved if that family had not lost the apartment in the first place. I'm talking later on a little bit about the right of first refusal, which is the right through which we could buy these properties. But I can say that we bought them at a very low price that had nothing to do with the mortgage that they were foreclosed to. Sorry, my English is not my first language, so please be patient with me. If they had developed some sort of scheme for that family to remain in the apartment, everyone would have been, much the better for that. So, well, this is just an overview of the importance of actually not letting people become homeless in the first place. And as far as developing new housing or renovating new housing, we've been working a lot with a model in which it's a collaboration between city councils and organizations of the third sector, of the non-profit sector, in which we develop housing or renovate housing or reuse properties that belong to the city council, and we get a long-term lease. Long-term can be like 60, 70, 90 years. And then we manage that housing that we have developed. And at the end of that period, the city council recovers the property. And it's a good way because, at least in the area that we work, city councils cannot get into very high debt. So that's a good way for them to be able to develop housing and to manage housing. And these are two big renovation projects. I'm talking a little bit more later about the framework agreement with Barcelona City Council to be able to develop this. The one on the right is right at the waterfront in Barcelona. It's a very, very touristic area. This building was bound to become, a high short-term touristic rental unit, but the city council bought it, so we are renovating it, and it's going to be affordable and social housing. A number of properties. So when we take part in a development or major renovation program, it's because part of it is going to be reserved for inclusive housing. So this is what we do, and we do take part in affordable housing projects as long as we have some inclusive housing. Basically because it's better to have a percentage of inclusive housing in a development that takes place than 100% in a development that does not take place. Secondly, because we don't think having all inclusive housing just in one place, so that the more mixed and the more diverse, the better. And also because it's usually easier from an economic viability perspective to have mixed buildings. So we are now jumping into these mixed developments in which there is social and affordable housing, or inclusive and affordable housing. And the one in the left, it's also a very interesting project because this was also bound to have been sold into the market and the tenants evicted and the city council bought it. And we are now, it's in a very, very poor condition. It was very badly built and it was even worsely kept. And we are renovating it with the tenants actually living, and sometimes they relocate within the same building. And it's a very dynamic process, and we're doing it together with the tenants. So it's a challenge, but it's also very, very rewarding. And this is yet another way. This is done together with a private investor. Some would call him an impact investor. It's someone that feels that he wants to give back to society. So he's developing these two buildings for us to manage in the long run in this scheme of combined social housing. Like in Spain, we call it protected housing, and it has a cap on how much you can charge for rent, depending on the different areas. And also some units would be reserved for city council and also for social organizations. And the building in the right is called San Pau, and it's also interesting. Most of the things we do have more than one layer. And this is interesting because it used to be a social gym and swimming pool coming from a public bath before the Spanish Civil War. And it's always been a very strong community, like a stronghold in the community, serving the right of health and the right of hygiene for people in situations of vulnerability in the neighborhood. So the fact that the city council bought it with the help of this investor, and now it's being recovered in the purpose of this community service, but also instead of having high-end again, touristic apartments, is going to be social housing. So it's kind of a win for the city. And it proves that things sometimes can happen, even if they look very, very, very difficult. And I'm just going to mention, a little bit of the importance we place in social support, because we talk a lot about accessing housing, but we also need to talk a lot about keeping housing, and in fact, in the access of providing and sustaining housing in this conference, that idea is embedded. So we feel that social support, or what we call accompanying people in their process, it's key for them to keep their homes. So the frame of reference is housing as a human right, and not just as the right to have your own home, but also the right from which other rights derive. Like you could be registered in your city. If you have a home, sometimes if you don't, you can't. You can vote, you can access health, many things that can happen if you don't have housing. The housing first perspective, in the sense not all of what we do is strictly housing first, but this perspective of having a home first and building from then the other things that need to be built or rebuilt, which is, rebuilding a life is a very nice metaphor when you talk about rebuilding housing as well. And then the idea also of a person-centered approach, that everyone is different and has different needs. Trying to work with the community and to relate to the services already in the community, which is complicated, but it pays. The idea that people, particularly those living in institutions, the right to come out of the institution, and it's the right to have the necessary supports to be able to do that. So it's not just the housing again, but also the support. And the idea that people living in our homes are not beneficiaries, they are tenants, and tenants have rights, but they also have duties. They have to pay rent, they have to keep the... So it's an empowering situation, because they start at a place where most of us start, which is something that we have a right to, but also we have a duty. We couldn't have done any of this in 10 years and house. Right now, I think we house around 3,600 people in about 1,400 apartments with a network of alliance. I think if we can say we have done something right, is being the promoter and the carer of alliances among different actors, from public administrations, private landlords, social organizations, social enterprises, private companies and institutions, like all working together, which is complicated and it usually takes a long time. But some projects cannot develop unless you have this framework of alliances. So going back to the programs we run and how they link with particular policies, the housing policy of the City Council in Barcelona, there's a department which is the dignified use of housing. They have two programs. One is to help people rent in the private market, but providing like a supportive framework, both for the tenant and for the landlord. And then there's our program in which we rent, and then once we have rented the properties, we rent them. Like it's a different, we have a lease of the use, and then we can be landlords to the tenants. The City Council refers to us, has given room for this program that we run, not just with Barcelona City Councils. Right now we have programs with 22 different city councils, so it's been scalable. And also, and the idea that this enhances the social housing part, and also because it's scattered through the cities, it goes against the ghetto. It's very complicated to manage. I can't begin to tell you how very complicated it is to manage housing that's scattered all over the city, but definitely it goes a long way on integrations and not doing ghettos. And then this right of first refusal that I was referring in Catalonia, and we are referring generally to Spain, but I have to say that we have 17 different housing policies, because in Spain housing is a competence of the autonomous communities, which would be something similar to the provinces here. The government in Catalonia has the right to purchase any property that is sold, any housing property that is sold that becomes from a foreclosure. So when a financial institution has acquired through foreclosure and then they sell the property, the Catalan government can buy. And so can social housing providers or organizations that are sort of registered as inclusive housing providers, such as ourselves. But we didn't have the money. So the policy was there, but we didn't have the money. So it was not put to good use. So we advocated, and some others did, and we showed how that was a tremendous opportunity. And then a framework agreement incorporating the Catalan Institute of Finance with a very good line of financing has made that we had acquired, I think, over 300 properties, and more organizations on the non-profit sector have. So that's become a policy that is now providing good results. And then what I was telling you about before, the possibility to develop on public land or to renovate public buildings on these long-term lease agreement that at the end goes back to the municipality, because the last thing you want is the municipality actually selling away the land. That's something that is not very well regarded. So these long-term agreements are a very good framework. And finally, another thing we are exploring is what we call collaborative purchases, and that we've had 2 or 3 of those, and we hope to do more. That's when an entire building is going to be sold in the market, and with the risk of tenancies at the end to be non-renovated, and then tourist apartments being put in place, or short-term rentals being put in place. So buying together with the city council is something that we have done, and there's been one. I don't think you have heard of it, but it's called Casa Orsola, and it's made at. I joke with my chair and my CEO saying that they've done their job for me for the next 5 years, because everyone is talking about that. So now everyone knows us. The challenges we have, and I'm about to finish, thank you for your patience. We need to increase the availability of housing. We have done a little bit. We wish there were like 10 more Hàbitat3s that would be doing roughly the same thing that we do. We need to develop different housing models. We realize that there is a part of the population when there are mental health issues, there's the difficulty to actually live in a home, in a building with other families that needs more support. We need to think outside the box and do things that are maybe not exactly housing, but more convenient for people. Generally speaking, we need more affordable housing, and we need to still work on networks, and we need to look at support yet from a more person-centered perspective, and particularly more from a prevention perspective rather than a reaction perspective. And to finish, I like to say that innovation, it never comes kind of out of the blue. It's always rooted in knowledge, in learning, in something that you have done, in something that others have done. And it always sparks from something prior. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. That's why it's so interesting to be able to share and to learn in international context, because we can never copy-paste, but always learn from one another. To summarize, I think we need to be ingenuous. We need to think outside of the box. We need to be bold and take risks and venture beyond our comfort zone and think. If we have done things that we have done because we didn't know they were impossible, and because we didn't know they were impossible, we sort of jumped into doing them. And we have to be thorough, what I was telling you about, trying that everything you do matters, everything that you do has different layers, can have different impacts, try to explore them all. Like we celebrated our 10th anniversary a few months ago, and we wanted to give something to people that came to the celebration, and we had a banner in one of our renovation sites that was kind of iconic project. So what we did, we turned that big banner into small key rings, and we did that together with a social enterprise. So the whole thing was kind of a very nice, put together. And then I recommend always that we have to be stubborn and overcome the belief that the impossible cannot be achieved. Thank you very much. Yeah, I was wondering, hope everything is clear and you don't have many questions, but if you do, I'm happy to answer them now or later on. Okay, so I was either very, very clear or very, very...
Jane, can you go to the mic, do you mind, for the translator?
Thank you so much for your presentation. And of course, my mind is now spinning around how this model, in particular the policy that you referenced at the municipal level, I believe, the right of first refusal. I guess my question is 2 parts. Number one, do you know if this policy exists in any other places, in particular in Canada? And question number 2 is if not, or even if it is in some jurisdictions, do you have any advice for perhaps folks who are working in the sector who are interested in advocating for a policy that would allow for a right of first refusal for, I guess, homes that are might be available through the municipal process.
Okay, it's not exactly local in the sense it's not the municipality, although I know that in Barcelona, when a whole building is being sold, they have also right, like the city council has the right of first refusal. The one I was referring to is in the Catalan scope, like in the autonomous community. When the law of the right to housing was developed back probably 20 years ago, that provision was already made. So they were kind of thinking ahead, and the right of first refusal was granted to the Catalan government. But then someone thought that maybe the city councils also could have that right in case the government would not want to purchase the property, and in the third term that social organizations might be able to purchase that. So I don't know. I honestly don't know whether in Canada that's something that is being done. The recommendation would be to think about it and to be aware, because sometimes what it takes to put that into law, it's easy. It's just to add, to have that idea clearly and see how it can work.
And obviously you have a model of success, so that's helpful as well.
Yeah. And also what I was saying before, it was really relevant that they developed a financing scheme, because obviously most social organizations did not have the muscle. We will, hopefully, because that's something I didn't say, and the fact that one could say, why should the government, why should the public sector help some organizations in the non-profit sector, but at the end of the day, the private sector, to develop and to thrive. By law, foundations such as ourselves are bound to invest in excess of 80% of our proceeds into our own missions. So hopefully when we finish paying our loans in 20, 25, 30 years' time, those proceeds have to be devoted to actually increasing housing. So it's kind of investing in the future and multiplying the effect of what can be done.
Thank you.
Just adding on to that, Jen, I know that right of first refusal policy does exist in select jurisdictions in Canada. I believe actually here in Montreal, that's a housing policy. So we advocate for that to be more widely adopted across Canada in different municipalities, but it certainly has got some uptake.
I have a question, just in Ron Rayside, I'm an architect here in Montreal. And when you build your buildings, or when you own buildings and you have financing that is, the repayment is spread over 30 years, do you have any long-term view of using equity and to be able to purchase more properties, or are you just not there yet?
Not there yet. We are exploring, and we are actively engaging with different sources. Impact investment and private and funds that it might be like an entire different conference, but this impact investment in Spain 10 years ago, 5 years ago, no one in that world will talk about social housing. Now they do talk about it. So yes, we are exploring other ways, other ways to get. Because right now we have to basically finance the entirety of what we do, which is, I forgot to mention that the loans that we get in this scheme of the right of first refusal are guaranteed by the Catalan government. That's a key thing, because the rate of debt that we have as an organization, it would not be sustainable in the private market at all. But all the loans we have in that scheme are guaranteed by the Catalan government and also subsidized. So that, temporarily is helping us until we can get some other type of financing and eventually our own income.
Do those guarantees mean a lot lower interest rate, presumably?
Both. They actually guarantee the loan, meaning that they sign that if we don't pay, the Catalan government will pay, which is like kind of a big commitment. And also it means a 2-point interest rate bonification. Is that a word? Like they assume 2% of the total interest, which is 3 point something. So at the end of the day, we are paying 1 point something. It's a huge commitment by the Catalan government. Thank you. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind to get to the mic, because maybe people at the end of the room.
It's for the interpretation, actually.
Ah, okay, and it's also for the interpretation. Sorry to make you walk.
It's all right. I like that. Thank you for the presentation. Quite interesting. A lot of things are just going through my mind. And you are from Spain, right?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Last time I checked.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking here, with your experience and vast knowledge, how would you draw a line between the policy that works or that would work here in Canada in comparison to the policy of your country where this housing program is, achieving successes?
I don't presume to know the Canadian policy frame. I leave that to Sheldon and Adrian to talk. Also, as I said, I am not speaking for the entirety of Spain because we have 17 different housing policies. Some of them work, some of them don't. And the line, if I have to draw one, is it has to be a long-term commitment and it has to be a social and political consensus. Because, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the first time to start building a legal and financial framework that allows for social housing to be developed and provided on the long term can't come from changing policies every time someone else gets into government.
Yeah, thank you. The reason I asked, like you rightly said, maybe the panel would have more insight into, answering some aspect of that question, because I heard you talk about the town council working with yourselves as private sectors, and you also talked about right to first refusal, of which the Catalan government guarantees. I see a lot of, intermeddling between these, agencies. So I thought, looking at the complexity of the Canadian system with the little knowledge that I have, I'm just, wondering how that web of intricacies can be diffused to get into housing programs such as you have. So I don't know I hope I make sense, right?
I think it's a great question, and you're going to cut to the core of our component of the presentation. So what I would think would be best is we can get going, because what we'll aim to do is show what we've learned from working with Habitat3 and what we think might work in Canada. So if you still have questions at the end, then I hope you come back up, but we'll try to answer them now.
Thank you.
I think they want me to reintroduce them.
So in fairness to Melanie, we had a moderator, we lost a moderator, we had a moderator, we lost a moderator, and now we have upgraded to Melanie Redmond, so thank you very much. My name is Sheldon Pollitt. I'm the Executive Director of Raising the Roof. I won't go on and on. I've been working in the sector for about 30 years. Spent a lot of time working in the sector of youth homelessness in my home province of St. John's, Newfoundland for many years. Very excited now to be a part of the team of Raising the Roof. One of the things I wanted to share really quickly is I met Natalia probably 9 years ago, 10 years ago. Now I'm aging myself even more. On a learning exchange to England, looking at housing options that were solutions that were being created through social enterprise, training and employing folks to gain access to much needed affordable housing. And what a beautiful marriage that is, training and employing folks for sustainable income so that they could actually indeed sustain affordable housing on their own for the long-term future. For me, that's also a story of squeezing every ounce of value. If you're going to build something great for one benefit, what if you built it and had 3 and 4 and 5 benefits, because you're training and employing people, giving them access to sustainable futures that they had control over themselves. So that is certainly part of the story as well. forgot to advance the slides. So one of the things you'll hear a lot about throughout, mostly Adrian talking about our work, is who we are, what we do, and how we do it in particular. For those in the room who don't know, Raising the Roof has been around for about 30 years. So it's a well-known, long-established organization that's been in the sector of housing and homelessness. Primarily for those 30 years, it's been advocacy, public education, research, some grant giving to other organizations to support the work across the country. About 4 or 5 years ago, as much as we continue to talk about this, it's a big country, so it takes a while for the news to get out. A significant pivot happened within the organization where we made the decision, I wasn't there at the time, some braver people than me, made the decision to pivot the organization. We still do all of those wonderful things that are really important, but the pivot was now we are actually in the business of developing, owning, and operating affordable housing, which you can imagine from what we were to what we are now is quite a shift and revisioning, and I would argue a tripling down in our commitment to have an impact on housing solutions for Canadians. So that is kind of the backdrop for us. So again, it focuses on affordable housing, the trades training, again, the origin story of where I first met Natalia, and wraparound supports. It's a big country. If we have to try and build organizational capacity, for example, to be the experts in every community that we want to develop housing in, that's going to take a long time. It's going to waste a lot of resources. So you'll hear through some of the things I'll talk about, but in particular, the story Adrian's going to tell is it makes much more sense for us to find partners across the country who are much more better suited to partner with us so they provide local solutions. They know the local folks, they know the local needs, they know the local environment that folks need to access in order to get access to affordable housing, but also the supports they need. So it's really that strong partnership model as well. So that takes the form of social enterprise training and employment as much as possible. We partner on every project. We try to find a social enterprise partner who can come to the table early. We just built out some social procurement guidelines to bring some clarity to that process. So wherever possible, we work with social enterprise to be a part of the renovation and construction of affordable housing for Canadians as well. Property management, again, same thing with the wraparound supports model that we look for local partners to provide property management services. Housing operations and support, one of the things that we talked about recently at a launch of our strategic planning process was the minute we started housing one Canadian, that's a different level of accountability and responsibility to get this right long term. Housing is a long-term commitment and investment, so we have to reflect that in how we take care of our organization so that we're there for those folks 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years into the future. The development management partnerships is an additional piece that we're growing into. And what that talks about, if our mission is to provide housing solutions to Canadians across the country over the next 5 years, for example, as part of our strategic plan, if I build a house and someone gets a home, great, that meets our mission. But if I help someone else build a house, someone is still getting a home, that still checks a huge box for us in terms of our mission and mandate. So we have a growing number of partners, primarily other nonprofits, some municipalities, who may have an opportunity, certainly have a need. And a lot of these are smaller communities as well. And my colleague, Terry Lee Kelford, with the Rural Alliance to End Homelessness, that's a huge piece of the work in the country as well. So also how to include rural and remote communities in the work to house Canadians. It looks at how do we support other folks in terms of developing housing. There's a huge need out there. They may have that need. They may even have a piece of land, but they have no capacity or experience developing housing. And we are certainly an active partner to help some of those folks achieve that as well. Building a sustainable RTR, as you can imagine, that pivot, which is about 4.5 years old at this point, is a huge undertaking for the organization. So what I would say is now we're looking at building back our foundation, a new foundation, because it's such a fundamentally different organization in lots of ways. So we're doing things like launching our next strategic planning process just last week with all of our board members and staff in Toronto. That'll look at really a plan over the next 3 years, but ideally over the next 5 years of what our ambition is in terms of the impact we want to have, not just in terms of, the number of housing units we want to have under operation, but those partnerships, the wraparound supports, the broadest range of folks on that continuum of housing solutions and supports required as well. If, housing is a human right and people have a right to choice in housing, well, we need to be responsible in building out that continuum, or at least playing our part in building out that continuum as well. We just did a piece of work with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, a very exciting piece of work. Adrian and our colleague Vicky in the back led that piece of work to look at how can we bring conversations around housing support needs earlier into the process of the financial analysis on developing a property. So instead of at the end of that pro forma financial analysis, we make the building work. Oh, now what are the support needs of folks that we want to house? Can we bring that process closer to a concurrent in-step look at how we're going to house people, the building design, the financial modeling, along with, well, who are the folks that we want to house in this property at the same time? So bringing those two pieces closer together. We do things like joint policy advocacy. I've been at this long enough where I was on boards of wonderful organizations who started sentences like, we are the only. We are the only, we are unique. And I understand why you're doing that, because you're trying to drive kind of investment in your organization. Nothing wrong with that. But I think a lot of us have learned over the last 20 years in our sector is that there's a hell of a lot more to be accomplished, certainly in a policy advocacy environment, by partnering with other organizations. So we're jointly doing things like partnership with the Canadian Housing Renewal Association, Tapestry, and others to send joint messages to those who need to hear it around what would some healthier housing policy advocacy look like. The Housing Solutions Lab, I'm going really quick here now. We launched a process. Again, one of our mottos is, if there was one solution to all of these complex issues, we would have found it a long time ago. So we need every tool in the toolbox, using puns as well, that we can have around how to have the right impact and investment, in this case, in the development of affordable housing. So that Housing Solutions Lab, which is funded by CMHC, is looking at how to create a national scale community bond to have a pooled fund that can be deployed anywhere in the country, really, when projects are at that state of readiness and need that investment. So that's a really exciting opportunity. We're hoping to have that work concluded by the spring with an actual product that we can actually take to investors and begin hopefully building up that pool of resources that we need. As Adrian will probably talk about, it tends to be that first money in when you're trying to do your due diligence and get to a state of readiness to even apply for example, federal funding. Well, that's a huge risk for organizations, and many struggle and get stuck in that very spot. Or the other way around, which is you've gotten through that process and now you need that big investment to make your project viable. Long-term capital planning, as many of us in the room are certainly aware, you don't necessarily develop housing on a 2 or 3 year timeline. In lots of ways, you're just getting started, and maybe even hopefully through the first few gates in that time frame. So we're starting to look at long-term capital planning that matches our ambition as well, and the capital requirements that we need to have long-term targets around developing. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Adrian.
Thank you, everybody, for joining today. My name is Adrian Dingle. I'm the Director of Housing Development at Raising the Roof, and I've had the pleasure of working with the organization over a period of intense growth since 2020, where we had only one active unit of housing, and now we're proud to be able to say that by the end of this calendar year, we'll be operating 147 units of affordable housing. This really comes across a number of different communities, including Ontario and Manitoba. We are a nationally registered charitable organization with a national mandate, and we aspire to fulfill that through our housing solutions work that we do. Our pipeline of future work looking into 2028, 2029 includes more than 436 units of affordable housing that are constituted in our own kind of equity investment as a charity. Beyond that, We are looking to 440 units of new housing that we are trying to create through that development management client service offering that Sheldon was speaking about. I'm going to get into some of our previous work that we've seen. I'm going to get into some of the work that's coming in the future, and really the thesis of this presentation, if I was to state it, would be to kind of use the organization Habitat3 as an analog for all of us here today to learn what kind of things you can look into the future and see have been successful on an international stage. How can we apply them to Canada? Are they pertinent? Are they relevant? And will they work here? That's really what we're trying to examine, and that's the reason that we've been so fascinated with Natalia's work at Habitat3. We see them as a group that has been tremendously successful over the past 10 years, and that we aspire to grow to their level of operational success and capital success as well. So looking into a little bit of background of the work that we do, you can think of Raising the Roof as a developer and landlord and asset manager in terms of where we occupy space in the framework of creating new affordable housing in Canada. We have a very strong network of local housing provider partners. We can't be the expert in housing provision for Indigenous families in Winnipeg and folks in Toronto who might not need deep levels of support but do need a break on rent. There's a huge diversity across Canada in terms of the need in the various communities that we serve, and so we work with those local partners who can supply those support deliverables, manage our properties for us, and work with us as partners in order to fit the need of the community and meet that need as much as possible. We work on the kind of design side, the funding side, the financing side, project management of bringing about these capital projects, and then we work closely with those groups towards the end of the capital project until the point where we're turning it over. A huge part of the work that we do is across the housing continuum from transitional all the way up to market rental housing. So if you can't see the font, it's from yellow to purple there. We had to have the obligatory housing continuum slide today. We really see a huge amount of benefit all the way across the continuum in terms of how it trickles back down to our overall mandate of homelessness prevention. One of the things that we're very proud to say is that we've delivered $2.6 million of rent savings to our tenants that we're supporting over the time that they've lived with us. And that goes back to when we first started operating housing in 2020 and comparing those rental rates that people have been paying versus market rents and CMHC rents up until today. And we're scheduled to deliver more than $1 million of savings next year. But that's really just a component of the work that we do. Affordability is critical, but support and acuity and matching the level of supports to the people in your units is perhaps even more important. To steal from the brilliant mind of the great Jim Dunn, who's a researcher at McMaster, everybody needs supports. I think a lot of us here today are lucky enough to be able to say we have a diverse network of friends and family who often provide that for support for us. But for those of us who don't, it's even more important to ensure that the correct level of support is there so that people can thrive in their housing and be successful and to grow into their lives. That classification of acuity and the way that we provide supports is a huge part of the work that we're doing presently as we now find ourselves in the position of operating a small to medium-sized portfolio of housing across the country, and something that we certainly want to put in place as we continue to have the aspiration of growth. Sheldon alluded to the trades training work that we do, and this is another critical analog for the way that we look at Habitat3. We try to use social procurement best practice in order to create as much opportunity for training on our construction sites as possible. We've had 261 people come through various social enterprise partners of ours on our construction sites, and over 80% of them are going on to long-term trades opportunities and careers in the construction sector. This is something we're really proud of, and we're trying to grow out as much as we can across our portfolio and do in a way that's sustainable and that makes sense in the context of proceeding at the pace of development and construction as we are trying to grow our affordable housing portfolio as much as possible. Those are some of our partners down below: Build Inc., Building Up, Community Builders, and Purpose Construction. There's a vast network of social enterprise contractors that exist across Canada, and for those of you that are working on construction projects, I actively urge you to check them out and see if you can integrate their work into your projects. So we're gonna get into the housing portfolio a little bit now. This is the very first piece of work that Raising the Roof did leading up to 2020. Shiloh House is a wonderful place that was previously a heritage church that is on TRCA, Toronto Region Conservation Authority lands, and Wow, it sure would have been cheaper to build it new than it was to renovate it. But the philosophy of the project was fantastic, and that today it continues to be deeply affordable, supportive housing for young people with developmental disabilities. To be able to, speak with Patricia, who's in the audience today, and hear the stories of what's coming out of the house is wonderful. And it also provided a heck of a lot of training outcomes because there was such a huge amount of work required in order to complete the renovation project. This was a project that happened right at that inflection point for raising the roof, where we were very aware of the research and of what was needed in Canada in terms of a solution to homelessness, or at least something that we felt like we could take on. This philosophy and this program of housing and trades training became very interesting to us and something that we wanted to scale out. And so we started working on some new projects. We were lucky to purchase one of the scattered sites from the City of Toronto when Toronto Community Housing was selling off some of their existing single detached homes. This is now a single family home that's made available to a newcomer family in Canada, and they've been living there since it was opened in 2021. Another fantastic opportunity for trades training that goes on to kind of have a long-term effect for the people that are going to live there. They pay affordable rents, and they have supports that are tailored to their needs, and we're very happy. I think that looking into the future, we started to try to scale this. One of the units that I think about all the time is headaches per square foot. You certainly can achieve a high headaches per square foot at smaller renovation and redevelopment projects. And so we started to look at how could we bring this to a more multi-residential approach. This was our first foray into that, intensifying a single family home by adding a second suite in the basement in the north end of Toronto. A fantastic project that continues to operate. And I think, typifies some of the work that we've done since then. This is, if you can believe it, an abandoned nail salon in Winnipeg that we purchased sight unseen in the middle of the pandemic, which was quite an interesting gambit. But since then, we've had the good fortune and the good partnerships in order to be able to bring this about as a triplex. It was a very interesting niche need that we were trying to meet in the community. There are not a lot of 3 and 4 bedroom units across Canada being built at this time, but specifically in Winnipeg and in the north end of Winnipeg, there are very few, to the point where there's actually no CMHC data for the median market rent for 3 and 4 bedrooms. As such, there's a big hole in terms of where people can rent as a family. And in particular, there's another community need that we were advised of by our partners, that is Indigenous families that are in the process of reunifying with their kids. That's a very complicated process, and you need to be able to prove that you have stable housing and sufficient housing, often a 3 or 4 bedroom. And so we tried to meet the need of the community by creating these larger units, and it's been a very interesting process where we've had a number of families come in and start the reunification process and be able to live here with their children while they reunify before they go on to accessing other forms of housing in the future. You can tell the guy who was in charge of cropping this photo is a Subaru fan. That was probably me. But this is a great project that we've tried to replicate, and that I think shows that good transition between consultation with community partners, meeting a specific need, albeit at a smaller scale. Then we started to try to find ways to scale up a little bit. This is an interesting portfolio of properties that we purchased from the city of Greater Sudbury. 5 single-family homes that we intensified by adding secondary suites in the basement, and we now have the option to put detached accessory dwelling units in the rear yards of all those properties, which we're working on now. This was 10 units that we refurbished because the city of Sudbury could not continue to operate these as affordable scattered housing. They wanted to intensify, they wanted to bring their capital out of these properties by selling them, and one of the kind of most horrific stats about affordable housing in Canada is that on a daily basis, on an annual basis, we are losing more units of affordable housing than we're actually building. I'm really sorry if I'm the first person to tell you that. But this was a great opportunity for us to step in and say, hey, sell them to us. Don't sell them on the private market where someone's going to come in and tune them up and rent them at market rent. And so Sudbury liked it. This was one of our first transactions done with a city that included multiple pieces of property. And it was successful such that we now have an option with Sudbury to purchase additional homes directly from their affordable offerings and try to do a replication of what we did there. We also want to bring this to other communities within Ontario. There's a large glut of scattered single-family home affordable housing that's being operated by municipalities as a result of funding that was made available in the 50s and 60s. Likely, a lot of it is in disrepair. We see a huge opportunity for this to be expanded into other municipalities across Ontario for sure. This is an example of one of the buildings that Raising the Roof purchased through the multi-unit residential acquisition program, which is a Toronto-based preservation program. This is something that we've benefited from 3 years in a row ever since they started offering the programming, and essentially the city recognized that the actual cost to develop a new unit of rental housing in Toronto was so significant and had a lot of development risk baked into it that it way outclassed the cost of purchasing an existing unit of residential rental housing and retaining it as affordable. This program gives money to groups like Raising the Roof that is interested in making acquisitions and committing to a 100-year guarantee that we will operate these units as affordable, and is a great way to, with limited risk, increase the percent of guaranteed affordable units in your community on a long-term basis. It's a very expensive program. It's in the tens of millions of dollars annually for the municipality. And as such, it's something that might not be within the reach of all municipalities across Canada. But something that we've been advocating for at the national level is seeing this kind of programming run through the federal government, where we can have that easy pathway to, or easier pathway to preserving existing affordable housing. It's a great story, and we're looking forward to benefiting and creating more work here in the city of Toronto. So you can see our photographers have gotten better. This is an example of the interior of a building in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, in the Spence neighborhood, that we purchased. It was an existing 24-unit rental building that was completely vacant and burned out. A ton of fire damage, existing issues with previous management meant that it was no longer fit for housing, and was probably, the destination was there would be some kind of tragedy on site as a result of poor management, or that the building would have been demolished. And because of historic zoning bylaws in Manitoba, the actual highest and best use for redevelopment under the existing zone would have been much less than 24 units, because we would have had to subscribe to modern parking and height ratios. There's an interesting zoning bylaw in Manitoba that allows you a 2-year clock from the moment that the property is vacant to return it to its former state and rent those units out without being subject to new zoning bylaws. And so we have been on a fast and furious run to renovate this project and turn it into deeply affordable, supportive housing. Our goal has been to take it from what it was, which was a health risk, a potential problem for the community, and turn it into something that is going to bring a lot of hope to a lot of people that need it in this community. We're working with a number of local partners, Siloam Mission and the Main Street Project, in order to ensure that we have adequate levels of support for the acuity levels of people that we want to house there. And this is under construction right now and planned to be complete in January. So this is one of the projects that is currently on the go, and that we look forward to potentially talking about next year when it's complete. Now, looking to the future, Raising the Roof has purchased from the federal government this property in Aurelia in Ontario, and we are looking to take it from what it is, which is a commercial facility that has a Canada Post in it, to a modern mixed-use residential commercial mixed building. This is a very interesting opportunity and constitutes one of our first new construction options that we're currently working on, and I think we'll talk a little bit towards the end of the presentation about some of the barriers that are present for new construction projects, but this is a very interesting one. It's also great to see the federal government engaging in things like this, offering the Federal Lands Initiative, finding additional federally owned properties that can be made available for redevelopment like this, and this is one of many that they're currently considering. This is a great example of the development management work that we're doing. This is an existing piece of municipal property in Corner Brook that we're working with a client to redevelop into affordable and market housing. This is just in the very infancy. We're just working on the land transfer and the initial designs of the project, but it'll be up to 150 units and will create a terrific home for community members that will be affordable and well located with respect to amenities and services. Raising the Roof is acting as a development manager in this case. We are not the equity, we are not the money, we're not the owner of this facility, but we very much believe that if we can contribute our expertise and experience to creating this kind of a project for a partner, it's just as good for the people that are going to live there. A door is a door, is what we like to say. And as a result, we found this interesting niche with other nonprofits and charitable organizations and sometimes faith-based organizations that are looking to create new affordable housing. They have some kind of combination of property and capital, but they might not necessarily have the expertise or capacity on their staff and board team in order to carry out a capital project like this. This is not an original idea. There's lots of other groups that are doing this kind of work in Canada, but we find we're typically well aligned with charitable groups that are trying to advance their own projects. We have other new construction land development opportunities in the City of Toronto that we're currently advancing as somewhat of a prediction in terms of what federal policy is going to look to stimulate in terms of new funding and financing for affordable housing in the near future. This is one example that's just early days, but shows you the scale of where we started from 1 unit to over 100 unit redevelopment. I think what I'd like to highlight with this slide is the intention of raising the roof to grow significantly in the future. We've had some growth, we want to grow more. We want to do it in a way that's sustainable. We want to encourage the environment to exist within which we can grow. And that's a big part of why we've been working with Natalia to learn about her organization and the environment for funding and creation of affordable housing in Spain. I think in order to bring it back to the original purpose of this presentation, which is our viewpoint of Natalia's organization and what we can do here in Canada, it's a very interesting time for affordable housing funding right now in Canada, where there's a huge shift in the landscape in terms of the federal government, the way that they're planning to fund things, and their response to groups like Raising the Roof that have been trying to advocate for different ways to create funding, create new opportunities for affordable housing to be built. The big ones that we want to highlight from Natalia's presentation earlier are that government-insured lending at low cost, the creation of portfolio funding that can be made available to dedicated developers who are going to go out and create this kind of work. One of the biggest things that Raising the Roof and other constructors of affordable housing face as a major barrier is we don't necessarily have the capital up front in order to be able to participate in the development landscape the way that a private group would. Our superpower is fundraising for these pieces of real estate, and we're very good at it. We have a terrific team that does that. But it's not feasible to fundraise in a way that is, hey, I'd love it if you give me $50 million for something that doesn't exist yet. You have to have something that's tangible that you can point to and say, here are these units that we will bring about, and they're located here, and they're for this, these people. We're trying to flip that on its head and find that opportunity for flexible portfolio funding that we can inject early into projects, encouraging the government to take that kind of risk with us on these projects as being the first capital in, and giving us that widespread portfolio approach and flexibility to do as we see fit, make acquisitions, invest in pre-development, and get it to the point where it can be ready for financing. This is one of the things that Natalia's organization and Catalonia have done so well, creating that pool of funding, creating that low interest rate environment, creating those government endorsements, and then also ensuring that there is that robust pipeline of municipally owned or state-owned property that's coming about that's suitable for this kind of development work. Those are the things that we want to focus on in terms of making some recommendations to the government here in Canada. We've had the luxury to be able to work with Build Canada Homes as they're forming to inform some of their policy in the way that they look to fund in the future. I think that it's a terrific opportunity for us to take some of the success that we've seen in Spain, bring it to Canada. And I think the thought that I'll end on is that it's a very hopeful time for housing funding in Canada. We are extremely optimistic about the way that Build Canada Homes is going to operate. And for those of you that don't know, this is the organization that is a Crown Corp that is going to take on a lot of the responsibility associated with funding and financing affordable housing builds in Canada. They've taken a lot of input from us and other groups that are advocating for this kind of work. And the kind of 3 or 4 things that you see on the screen here and that we've spoken about today are certainly included as highlights within the way that they look to fund and finance projects in the future. So stay tuned. There will be more information about that in the fall budget, I'm sure, and it is a very hopeful time. Thank you all for listening to us today. I appreciate you being here.
All right, we have about 20 minutes for questions, so anyone wants to come to the mic. First of all, I just want to say it's so impressive, and I know from our advocacy work working with the federal government at least, they really like to see successes in other jurisdictions to inform decision-making in Canada. And so it's really important that you've brought Natalia and this work to Canada. Yes, please.
Hi, excuse me, Philippe. I'm the executive director for Society Saint Vincent de Paul. I've got two questions. Number one, you don't seem to have a project in Ottawa, and I welcome working with you because we want to start one in our office. Second, that's not a question. We'll talk. Second question is more in terms of advocacy, because I hear you mentioned the word advocacy. I don't know, I didn't count, maybe 10 times during your speech. And one of the things that strikes us as an organization is that the key basic effort is income. You mentioned income as well. But what we're not talking about is guaranteed basic income. And that's an issue that will resolve a whole lot of issues along the housing template that you had in there that no one's talking about. And I wonder, does Raise a Roof advocate for that?
Raising Roofs certainly, is aware of and participating in those conversations, but it's not a specific focus of our advocacy right now. That's not because we don't support it, but we do support the work of others when it comes to work around advocacy around basic income. I'm looking at Jen Crow, who's the ED of Choices for Youth. Long history in St. John's, Newfoundland, participating in those discussions as well. So I would look at it from the perspective, we're focused on housing and housing policy advocacy and their by relation, homelessness policy advocacy. But we play more of a supportive role for others and when it comes to things like basic income and so on.
One thing that I'll add is it's almost impossible. It is impossible to make a pro forma work for a real estate project on OW and ODSP. In terms of the shelter allowances. It's not enough revenue to run a building, let alone have the necessary supports in place to work with those folks. So it's not something we advocate for directly, but it is something that affects our work directly for sure.
Yep. Yeah, I just want to add that what we call protected housing can be developed and managed reasonably if we don't have to purchase the land. But inclusive housing, which is what you are saying, needs to be extra funded. That's not something that can be done on a business plan that works on its own.
Thank you for the inspiring presentation. Natalia, I'm picking up on one tiny thing you mentioned, which was that of tenants having rights and tenants having responsibilities. And I heard in Raising the Roof sort of this component of teaching and building together, and just curious if you have more examples of sort of that responsibility side of the equation and what happens after the building is there that kind of continues to make that a success.
Yeah, thank you for picking that up. Basically, what we do, I've told you that the units that we rent to social organizations, there's a very specific support according to the needs of people. In the programs we run with city councils, we as an organization do the support, but then it's focused on tenancy support. And that basically goes to management of payments. People pay, I don't know if that was made clear in the presentation, but people don't pay according to what the apartment costs. They pay according to their income. So City Council pays for the program to be run, but also pays for the rent gap. So it is much harder to pay rent, even if it is not more than 30% of your income when you make 500 euros a month, when you make 5,000. But part of the accompaniment, we like to say rather than support, is for people to understand that they have to pay rent. That's kind of the first thing. Then there's these trying to keep the property in good condition together with us. We have to say that most of the properties that we have purchased or rented are not particularly well kept. They were not particularly well built in the first place. That's one of the things that you mentioned. Purchasing and renovating has the impact of being not just more sustainable, but also having an impact on the community, because those apartments or those units are going to be in better shape. And the other one is having a good relationship with the neighbors and the neighborhood. So that's basically what we focus on. We have to say that at the beginning of the programs, the emergency program, people that had lost their jobs, have lost their homes, it's been increasingly hard because the program has been increasingly open to people in more complex situations. And we reached a point in some of those situations in which that tenancy support is not enough. And that was what I was mentioning when I said the challenge of developing more adequate housing, call it what you want, that has extra support and can work. We need to work on the very, very long term. Because some situations, usually the crises are harder on those who are on a more complex situation. And I hope I've answered your question.
Yes. Hi, I'm a housing manager in Niagara Regions, for the Niagara Regions, so I'm actually just have a few maybe technical questions about how some of this runs. I'm just wondering about funding any of the operational or support costs when you partner with Raise the Roof with some of your communities. So you're finding a community agency to run and property manage and provide support. Normally that would be built into your revenue. However, supporting and supportive housing costs a lot more than revenue can do. So I'm just wondering if there's another form of income, or are you looking to that nonprofit agency to come up with the funding to provide the supports?
So I'll start and maybe Adrian can jump in more detail. I think one of the things we're very aware of as a national organization trying to do this all across the country, it is anyone's guess as to what's available at a municipal level per community, certainly at a provincial level. We go into a community like Winnipeg and have created a fantastic relationship with the Manitoba government and others who are bringing those additional support dollars to the table. So we talk about affordability from the perspective of the rent. Well, that depends on the capital stack. Less debt, more affordable. Well, the same thing applies, I guess, on the support side of it. As we go into a community, there may be a need, certainly is a desire to support folks with higher acuity needs, but if there aren't support resources available, then it becomes very difficult, if not impossible. And I think the challenge sometimes you're setting up individuals and communities and organizations to fail because you're not putting them into housing with a pathway to successful tenancy. That doesn't mean you shouldn't house folks, don't get me wrong, but that becomes the immediate challenge that you're setting people up to fail very quickly. But you go to another community where there may be capital resources, but there is not a municipality or even a provincial government in many cases willing to come to the table with the support resources. So that's why we're doing that piece of work with the Canadian Observatory as well. So we have those conversations much earlier when we're looking at the pro formas, really starting to put the math together around a project. Well, we should be concurrently looking at, okay, well, what options do we have around support resources in this community? It could be philanthropy, but long-term sustainable funding, often it's a municipality or a provincial government that you're looking to step into that role. Adrian, do you want to kind of chime in with your piece of it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's no operating pro forma that works with support coming out of the rent revenue. It's not possible. We never talk about our projects as being supportive until we get that kind of indication from a level of government that they're interested in creating that kind of development with us. We underwrite our buildings at a blend of market and affordable rents when we're looking at the kind of acquisition phase of the project. And then we're actively working with the groups in that community that we have pre-identified, usually government, in order to try to encourage those supportive relationships. It's always a one-off. It's always like those programs are very rarely prescribed in terms of how much is available. They're always overwhelmed with people that are looking to seek their funds. So they're sometimes difficult to find. And
we are overwhelmed with people looking for our funds.
Yes, and that's just the nature of where we're at in macroeconomically, unfortunately. But
I also just wondered, based on where some of your funding is coming from, Are you signing contribution agreements to maintain affordability for, say, the 20 years or X number to ensure that those units are going to maintain affordability in Canada?
Yeah, that's right. Most of the kind of encumbering housing agreements that we have with either municipalities or the federal government, in any case where somebody sells us a piece of property that was formerly publicly owned, or in a case where we accept a contribution that is going to go towards the capital work on site, there's some form of encumbrance. And it's kind of funny, like we'll sign a 20-year dedication, but it's our mission to keep that housing affordable in perpetuity as long as possible and within the constraints of the built form. Our agreements with Toronto for the Mura program are 100 years. So there's even higher levels of sustainability considerations that we have to have when looking at those buildings.
And then are you working with any of the municipalities on rent supplements to have deep affordability in those units?
Yes, some municipalities are more ready than others, for sure.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to add, sorry. As you said, social support does not come from revenue. Not even social management comes from revenue. And they're two different things. And I have to say that after 10 years, we're beginning to listen to that. So at some point, it has to be not only the rent gap, but also the social management and the support. And it has to come from somewhere. And into maintaining affordability, I forgot to mention that the properties that we buy with the right to buy or right of first refusal are perpetually can turn into protected housing. We have to keep them as such for the 99 years that it's what we buy. So actually we're not buying the full property, we're kind of buying a very, very long lease. And all that support and protection that we get from the Catalan government sort of gets paid back because after those 99 years, the properties revert to the Catalan government. It's something up to our heirs to negotiate leasing agreements, but we won't be there. But what I'm trying to say is that in these projects, also in the ones that the land is leased for long term or the properties are leased for long term, the maintenance of affordability is a requirement, not just for 20 years, but usually for much longer.
That's excellent.
It's kind of a trade. You in these schemes, you are being very favored to develop housing, so the requirement has to be explicit that this housing has to be affordable for a long time.
Well, and I really liked that you said you, in some of those cases, return the units back to the government. So I don't know if Raise the Roof, if that's something as each municipality has their national housing strategy target they need to meet. Partnership is the only way to do it. We're not going to hit it if we have to do it on our own.
Thanks for the presentations. Graham Cuban, I'm an affordable housing development consultant, but I'm just wondering, I think you mentioned Build Canada Homes and some of the conversations you've been having with them. Part of what I understand the feds are wanting to do is maybe actually own the properties, and I'm wondering if that's like analogous to Catalan and some of the experience in Spain. On the pro formas that I've run, I think we can cut rents in half if the feds are the owners, which obviously would, dramatically change the housing costs for tenants. I don't know if you have any more insights that you can share, or if maybe from Spain you can give some sense of how that ownership model evolved, like from a political decision-making side.
Well, I can say that last century, and for someone who was born like halfway through last century, to say last century sounds, I think of the 19th century all the time when I say it. There was a clear intention. There was actually a sentence saying we want a country of propertarians, which is the Spanish way to say it, not proletarians. So the whole housing policy was aimed to people purchasing homes. The good thing about that is that about 6.5 to 7 million homes were built in this protected scheme homes, which was about a third of the entire number of homes that were built. That's after the Civil War and great migration, so a huge need of housing. And that policy addressed the needs of a few generations of people, like including my parents, that could sort of leave their homes and marry and start a family. They forgot to think that there would be a 21st century. So all that housing that was built and was protected and was sold to the people ended up in the private market. So now we have completely shifted the sort of the pendulum. And if you talk about protected housing ownership in Spain, they're probably going to run after you in not very nice terms. Personally, I think that some long-term access to properties in a way that do not end up in the market is something to be considered. But right now, all policy on protected housing is thought on right of use for a while or rental, not ownership.
Hi, great presentations. Thank you so much. I'm Conrad. I work for Van City Community Foundation. We operate the designated stream for reaching home funding. You mentioned federal pathways to replicating the success that you've had in purchasing larger scale housing blocks. Are you utilizing Reaching Home to purchase these, or are there barriers to accessing Reaching Home funding?
We've, I think, participated in Reaching Home. I think they helped with the capital work that happened at the nail salon triplex that I demoed on screen. So we've used their funding in the past, which has been great. I don't think that we've considered their contribution in the scheme of that like rental preservation model that I was talking about in the city of Toronto. I was alluding more to, we're trying to work with the Canadian government to encourage a fund that would be available to replicate what Mira does in Toronto at a national scale, because there's so many municipalities that are not capitalized to the point of where they can actually make those kind of investments on an annual basis. But I'd love to learn about if that was something that would be of interest to Reaching Home in the future. So thanks for your question.
We have time for this last question.
Hi, thank you for the great presentations. I learned so much. My name is Kyla. I work for Women's Shelters Canada, and I'm on the development side, so supporting shelters that do want to do new builds. Sheldon, I really liked when you said, that it was like a really big decision for Raising the Roof to branch out and start owning your own properties and do development, especially services for others. I'm just curious if you can speak a bit to was that the board that made that decision, and where did the need come from? Or was that more maybe from the staff side, being I think this is a place that we need to go into, and I guess them taking that big leap?
The biggest question for last. Well done. Not to go too deep in the history of Raising the Roof, I was a board member of Raising the Roof up until 2018. Myself and some others kind of were transitioning it at the time. And like many nonprofits, you have a life cycle of, your mission and mandate and vision, no different than sometimes, businesses operate the same way. So I think for many of us, it was kind of all writing on the wall that the organization was due kind of a revisit, a refresh, kind of not necessarily, we're going to go do something completely outside of affordable housing, don't get me wrong. But clearly we were in need of, a restart, a reset. And I think, I was on my way out the door as a board member when those conversations were happening, and it was some combination of staff, I think, and the board kind of coming to the conclusion of we need to reset, and we need to reset big. Part of that was also, I would be honest, paying attention to what was happening in the country around that time. You can imagine kind of going into COVID and all that brought. I think the other piece of it was the vision was starting to arise around, you know what, if we also use our construction projects to train and employ people, which also is our end of kind of addressing kind of poverty issues of folks, is giving them pathways, sustainable, livable incomes. And there is a big difference between an income and a livable income. So I think it was like an evolution that landed on the doorstep of our current board chair, Mark Zabrano, of Building Up, if people know those folks in Toronto, an amazing social enterprise, training and employing a lot of folks over the last number of years. So they took it on boarded it, really started to think about it differently from a building capacity perspective, certainly from an affordable housing and social enterprise perspective. So that is really the germination. I think it was a logical conclusion of an organization that had been around for a long time and needing a kick in the pants around, okay, what are we going to do now kind of thing. So it was like that kind of organic process, and sometimes that means, it's okay for organizations to say we've done our bit and maybe it's time for someone else. But for organization and my former organization did the same thing, really looked at the edge of the cliff, okay, what are we going to do now? And it was actually, hard as it was, it ends up being the healthiest thing you can do. Because if you make the active decision and turn around and say, we're not done yet, That's incredibly empowering as much as it is scary.
And it's an amazing example of maximizing a great brand. Raising the roof, building housing, come on.
I just want to add very quickly that it's hard for someone from my context to think of an organization as only being advocacy. But I think that after you start getting your hands on, your advocacy is going to be much different. So what we realize is that what we do at Hàbitat3 is so much. What we can explain and tell and help change the ecosystem and hopefully inspire others to do something similar or maybe different, we can do because we have tested things that have worked and we can explain them. So it kind of retrofits. So I don't think we should think raising the roof is stopped doing advocacy, because it's going to do a lot more.
Amazing. Well, we're at time. I want to thank our fantastic speakers. Thank you for coming all the way from Spain. Thanks to Sheldon and Adrian.